Raul Castro's son last Wednesday reached an agreement with the United States, and the deal is already finalized. There are a few loose ends that I'll tell you about. But the agreement is not only written, as we told you weeks ago, it's also finalized. Cuba and the United States are in agreement, and there is a main point in that agreement. I assure you that saying this moves me because it's been almost 70 years of hunger, torture, prison, political prisoners, pain, blood, and death for the Cuban people. Within a year, there will be freedom in Cuba.
Castillón Confidencial by Albert Castillón.
Welcome, how are you, Confidenciales? Thank you for being there, for the strength, encouragement, and affection with which you receive this confidential information every day. And lately, we've had good news, and look, there's nothing I like more. We've been through some very tough years. Just as Venezuela, Cuba, and Spain, we're still neck deep in it with bad news to give them. Little by little, this is changing. It started to change when Donald Trump arrived at the White House. And he doesn't intend to go unnoticed like just another president, but to change the world. And with criticism, for better or worse, certainly with some mistakes, but he is changing it. Today, I'm not talking to you about Venezuela, I'm talking to you about Cuba. Last week, I told you there was a plan. Weeks ago, I told you about that transition plan in Cuba, and that it was being negotiated between agents of the Central Intelligence Agency and members of the Castro regime. Then we learned more. We learned that there was a date, right? Last Wednesday to start changing things. Well, we thought that what was going to happen that Wednesday was that the first step would be taken and prisoners in Cuba would be released. No, it was much more, so much more. We're talking about the third major meeting held between Cuba and the United States. There are still people who doubt that these meetings take place. I'm telling you, they do happen, they exist. Today, most media outlets around the world are already publishing this information. This third meeting on Wednesday of last week was crucial. And on the Cuban side, it took place with Alejandro Castro Espín, with whom the previous two meetings had already taken place. This man you see is the son of Raul Castro. He is 94 years old now. He is Fidel Castro's nephew. By the way, he has never gotten along well with his father, Raul Castro. He is a colonel in the Cuban army, but that's by his father's orders, not by merit. He hasn't been seen wearing this military uniform very often. He was born in 1965. He has a doctorate in political science and is an engineer. He has held key positions in Cuban intelligence. And he is the one who will lead Cuba to democracy. Remember the name. Yes, he is a Castro, that's right. But I'm telling you, he is the person who is negotiating with the United States to bring democracy to Cuba. And this is moving much faster than we could have imagined. You might ask, what role does Diaz-Canel play? Is he the visible face of the Cuban regime? Well, he's a politician who was put there for that purpose, to be the public face, to hold meetings, to give speeches. But it's the Castro family and Alejandro Castro Espín who are still steering Cuba's future. And gentlemen, in this matter, there's no one who dares to challenge him or say he's not the right person. Raul Castro's son reached an agreement with the United States last Wednesday. and the agreement would already be finalized. There are a few loose ends that I'll tell you about. But the agreement is not only written, as we told you weeks ago, it's also finalized. Cuba and the United States are in agreement, and there's a main point in that agreement. I assure you that saying it makes me emotional, because it's been almost 70 years of hunger, torture, prison, and political prisoners, of pain, blood, and death for the Cuban people. Within a year, there will be free elections in Cuba. I repeat, within a year, it has been agreed that there will be free elections in Cuba. The agreement reached between the United States and Raul Castro's son, Alejandro Castro Espín, would be Delcy Rodriguez. But in Cuba, he would be the person within the Castro regime who would be directed by the United States, by Marco Rubio, who has been the mastermind behind the whole operation to achieve those free elections within a year. That is the commitment made between both countries. There are still some loose ends, and they are important. We are told by people familiar with this information, and the news comes to us from sources in the United States, not from Cuba. We are told that when it comes to negotiating, Raul Castro's son is very clever, he's intelligent, and he doesn't want to pay for his last name with a life in prison or a life sentence or persecution from the United States. That worries him. They also tell us that he acts like a company executive, not like a military man or a politician. It seems that he negotiates like an executive. He wants to protect his father, despite their poor relationship. And every time they mention Raul Castro, he rails against him, even says inappropriate words against his father. The United States never knows if it's just an act to seem like something he's not, although our information is that this enmity does exist. Sources from Cuba have told us this. However, he's still his father, and he has requested in that negotiation, and here are the loose ends that need to be tied up, that Raul Castro, his father, not be sentenced to life imprisonment. Let me remind you, I'll say it again, he is 94 years old, and often at public events, the real one doesn't show up. A double appears who, according to all sources, is intellectually better prepared than him. Well, the agreement involves a process. It takes a series of steps. Yes, the release of political prisoners is one of the first steps, but there is another. I know that the people of Cuba who are watching us from there, when there's electricity, when they can connect, and I love that they spread what we talk about here, because I assure you the source is reliable. They assure me, and that's what they tell me, that with this agreement that Cuba and the United States have just reached, in 2 or 3 months there will be food in Cuba, there will be medicine in Cuba. The hardship in Cuba will be over in 2 or 3 months. A short time, because they believe it's the priority. There's hunger, there's no electricity, there are no medicines. Children and elderly people, the most vulnerable, die every day, and they want to stop that. The United States wants to stop that hemorrhage at the source. Therefore, in 2 or 3 months, food, aid, supplies. The phrase they use is, there will be plenty of everything. Hopefully, hopefully. They haven't seen that kind of abundance in Cuba in 66 years, have they? The strategy involves negotiating the details about the Castro government. The United States says they must be tried because there are courts, criminal courts in the United States that accuse Diaz-Canel, Raul Castro, and the Castro government of different crimes, that they cannot offer a general amnesty. And as I said, Alejandro Castro is asking for that general amnesty. In fact, he has even gone so far as to request exile in Russia. Alejandro Castro Espín is asking the United States during negotiations for exile in Russia for his father and the entire Cuban government. And that's where the United States still hasn't made a statement. And as I said, they have that problem because the American justice system is after them. How will they solve this issue? Well, that's the only thing left to solve because the basis of the agreement has already been set. It's not time yet to speculate about what the possible or probable outcome would be, whether they would get that exile in Putin's Russia or not, or they would be arrested and taken to Brooklyn to the same prison as Maduro. This remains to be seen. But what I've been assured is that the agreement has been made, the deal is done. The deadline for free elections is a maximum of 1 year, and Alejandro Castro Espín, take note, would be the person who would carry out that transition and then leave the final decision in the hands of the Cubans. Who will govern their country? In many ways, it's a carbon copy of Venezuela. Do you realize that? Cuba was always the one who ruled Venezuela, directed the drug trade from above, and made sure that Cuban intelligence kept the business going. It's history, gentlemen. It's all in the past. What happens will be faster than you can imagine. And if freedom hasn't yet arrived in Venezuela, but things have changed in a month, Cuba should get ready because the process has kicked into high gear. If it happens, we'll tell you about it here. Long live free Cuba. We investigate.
Castillón Confidential, by Albert Castillón.